So welcome back to the Perl Maven TV show. We had a little break, but now we are back again, and I hope that we're going to have a regular weekly show as we had earlier. And this time with me is Chad Granum, but probably you can pronounce your name better, Chad, right? Hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. How about you?
I keep having this problem with names, but anyway. So where are you speaking from?
I'm speaking from Oregon City, Oregon, just outside of Portland.
Okay, so how's the weather? It's too warm here right now.
In the afternoon, it's way hot for Portland, but actually this morning it's quite cold.
Okay, that's good. So usually when I start talking to people, I ask them about their background and how do they get to Perl, and that's what I would like to get a little bit about you before we go into actually. I've heard about you or from you when you mailed me about the Fennec project, right?
Yes.
So that's going to be a major focus, I think, of our chat here. But just tell me about yourself. How did you get into programming and Perl and this project?
Well, I initially got into programming in college. I had initially tried network administration, and that wasn't working out, probably because I tried the Cisco tract and it was all proprietary. But while taking classes, there was a special topic class on Perl, and I took that class and found I really enjoyed it much more than any other language I'd been learning. And from then on, pretty much everything I did personally was done in Perl. So that's where it started.
So actually in college you took Perl classes.
Just one. It was a special topic class.
That's interesting. Were there other languages, such classes?
Yes. I'd also taken some classes on Java, C++, assembly, and Bash shell scripting.
Okay, and none of these were really good. And Python or Ruby or?
I did not take any classes for Python or Ruby. I've looked at some Python code, and I've done some very minor things in Ruby. But Perl is where most of my focus has always been.
Okay, and how's this your involvement in? And I saw you a couple of in like last 2 years. I think I saw you writing a couple of blog entries on blogs.perl.org,
Yes.
mentioning some object-oriented system, and then on the Fennec project, right?
Yes, it's actually reversed the order of those, but yes, the system is an implementation of DCI, which actually still has a long way to go, and I've not gotten back to it, so that's unfortunate. But DCI is data context interaction, and it's another style of doing object-oriented programming that reduces the number of unexpected interactions.
Okay, and have you been doing that kind of programming, or is just an experiment for you?
I mostly did that as an experiment. Most of the principles of DCI can be applied without a framework. The idea was just to make it easier.
Okay. Okay, so who would you use that? So you said that you're experimenting with it, but do you know other people who are using DCI?
I don't know anyone who's using pure or strict DCI, but a lot of people, when they read about DCI, apply some of its principles to everything they do. The idea is to make your data objects, such as objects you pull directly from a database, very dumb, just getter and setter methods for the most part. And then the actual logic gets put into a context instead of on the object. It's sort of a role is the term that's usually used. I sometimes don't use that term just because Moose has roles and they're not necessarily a one-to-one mapping. But the idea is to keep the logic you need around the objects you have isolated into various contexts. That way you don't have the methods being called in a context where they don't make sense.
Okay. Does it have anything in relation to being immutable or mutable, that the style that trying to make every object immutable?
No.
No, that's totally different.
DCI is a very hard concept to explain. I've not yet found a site that can do it succinctly. Usually it takes several paragraphs and rereading them several times before it clicks. So,
I
which is
guess.
unfortunate because it's a very useful concept.
I guess maybe examples, or especially pointing out examples that here is how you would do without DCI, and what are the problems with this, and then
The one,
showing what would be the DCI implementation of that.
well, the most common example given is a bank account. Data object would be very dumb. It would just have the account number and how much money's in the account. And then you'd have a context such as deposit. And then the deposit will have a role for its accounts. And so you'd put you'd put the account into the role, and the role has the method of add or subtract. And when you're not in that context, the account doesn't have an add or subtract method.
Okay.
So the method only exists in the context where you're going to use it.
So you could based on authentication authorization, you could use either this object, or what is it, or role, right?
Yes, it's one of the hard things to grasp in DCI is that your objects aren't always in the roles that apply to them. The roles are applied dynamically as needed. So like right now
Okay.
with Moose, you'd create an object and at the very top you'd say with this role, with that
Yeah.
role. In DCI, you wouldn't do that. Instead, you'd have a variable of the role type and you'd shove an account or any other object that can meet the needs of that role into that slot.
Okay. Well, that's difficult, as you said, I think.
Yes. I think I've done a horrible job of explaining that. So I hope people who have any interest in that will go look it up for themselves and not rely on what I just said.
I don't know. I had a certain sudden feeling that I might understand, but it might be just temporary feeling, and it will go away. Anyway, the Fennec project. So you know that I'm quite into testing, and so I was interested in looking at it and then trying to understand what does it really provide. What's that?
Well, the Fennec project actually started after a friend of mine and I had a debate about various testing frameworks. There was one that we used at work, there's the Test More stuff that's on CPAN, and there's a few others that we had seen. And we were talking about how each of them had benefits, but that none of them really worked well together. And I thought it would be a good idea to create a testing framework that integrated all the really good things and just made it easier for you. So that's how the Fennec project was born. Some of the first things I wanted to fix were that, first of all, forking is a bad idea currently when you use Test More. Just because of the way Test Builder receives all the results, you're going to have problems with different test numbers being duplicated, because if you fork and then run a test in each fork, they're both going to take the next number.
Yeah.
Then the harness can also complain because your tests might come out of order. Then at the very end, your plan, assuming you're using done testing, will be incorrect because it'll only have the tests from one of the processes. All in all, that's not very nice, especially when you want to test code that forks. So that was one of the first goals of Fennec, and it's accomplished that. You can just fork arbitrarily in a Fennec test, and it'll do what you want.
Does it work on Windows as well?
Currently, it is passing its tests on Windows. The problem with Windows implementations of Perl is that fork doesn't actually exist, and it instead uses threading.
Yeah.
So there's lots of gotchas you can run into. I'd never recommend actually forking in Perl code in Windows, but it works as well as can be done with the way Perl in Windows is.
Yes. So forking, that's one of the things, and that's an important thing. I'm not sure if there are what other solutions are there. I usually have my tests a client server part, and the server doesn't really test, so I fork before. before loading actually test more, and then it's okay because actually I only have tests in one of the processes. But you say that in Fennec it's okay to have tests in both. How does it collect the output or?
The way it works is it utilizes some features of Test Builder to get around the problems with Test Builder. That is, each process when you run a test, the output that Test Builder recognizes is actually a collector class. It's a tied class, I believe. It might not be tied. I don't remember exactly how it's implemented, but all results that go to Test Builder are intercepted instead of being sent out to the console. It then goes to a collector class, which is customizable. You can create your own form of collector. Currently, the only one that exists uses temp files. So each process outputs all its test results to a temp file specific to that process. And then your main process will collect them. It'll gather all these files and combine the output of all of them into one.
Okay, so how does that work in terms of timing? And what happens if one of the processes dies or doesn't provide the output?
Well, Fennec under the hood uses two other things that I've written. The lowest level one is child.pm, which was originally created for the Perl 5i project. And it's basically an object-oriented wrapper for fork, because fork seems pretty simple, but it's very easy to get it wrong. And child makes it dead simple to fork and not worry about details. It gives you an object handle to both the parent process and the child process, depending on which you are in, where you can check the return value, you can send messages, you can kill it. So using that, it's able to tell, oh, this process was successful, or oh, this process died. Let's make sure the user knows that the test wasn't successful. And on top of that is a tool called Parallel Runner, which lets you specify how many forks or how many processes you want to use max, and then you just give it a bunch of subroutines, and it'll take care of running them and not going over your process limit. And I should back up a bit. One of the main reasons to fix fork is that in Fennec, there's some concurrency that you get for free. You're supposed to define tests as test blocks, which are small subsets of your overall test file, and it'll run these in parallel unless you ask it not to.
Okay, that's what basically proof can. So you would just write test in the same way as usual other test files in the tdirectory.t files, right? And
Yes.
you would run them with proof or make test.
Correct.
So the proof already has the capability of running parallel.
Yes, but prove can run your files in parallel. It can't run things within each file in parallel. That's what Fennec does. Which there's a few reasons to do this. First of all, if you run different blocks within your test file in parallel, they can't interact with each other, assuming there's no database involved, that is. So you can set up any state you want, change any globals you want, change anything you want within a test block, and know that nothing you have done is going to bleed into your other test blocks. They're completely isolated.
Wait, you mean that even if there is a global variable in the script, they are still somehow separated?
Yes, they're separated because Fennec will fork before running each test block. So if you change something in one test block, it doesn't change it for all the other test blocks.
So it's a little bit like subtests, except that each subtest or each block would run in its own process.
Yes, and you can turn this off. By default, Fennec will use up to 3 processes to run test blocks. Mm-hmm. You can specify any number you want. If you specify 1, then it'll only run 1 at a time, but it'll still fork. If you say 0, then it won't fork at all, and it'll be like you'd expect. It just runs them all in sequence in one process.
Okay. I saw that there are these some tests that are in the main body of the test file, and then some tests within the blocks. What is the relationship between them? Where do the tests in the main block run? That's just the main process?
The tests in the main block will run as they're encountered. So you open your test file, and it'll go from top to bottom in a linear way. Any tests that are there at the package level will run as they're encountered. Test blocks that you define get stored for later. And then when it gets to the very end of the file and hits done testing, that'll kick off your workflows, which is your test blocks and other blocks, and it'll run all of those.
Okay, I understand. So it basically, even if I have a test in the main code at the bottom, that will run before any of the
Yes.
forks.
Yes,
Okay.
it will. The Fennec web page, which is a GitHub page, on the Workflows tab, there's a section at the very bottom called Stages. And I'd highly recommend anyone who's interested in seeing how Fennec actually processes, gets from the top to the bottom and runs everything, use that. It's a fake debugger that I built in JavaScript that will show you line by line, process by process, how it processes that example.
Yeah, I saw that. That was very, very impressive that I could just click on it and it showed me step-by-step things. At first, I didn't know what to do there, but then when I figured out that it's just how to move it forward, then that it looks really nice. By the way, who is using Fennec? So I looked at CPAN, and I think I found one module outside of your modules that is using the Fennec Lite, whatever it's called, right?
Yeah, Fennec Lite was just the bare bones benefits, some of the bare bone benefits of Fennec to use in testing the things that Fennec uses, because I didn't want to create circular dependencies on Fennec. If you can't install Fennec without it already being installed, there'd be a problem. So Fennec Lite solves, but I don't recommend Fennec Lite when you can use Fennec.
Okay. So who's using it?
Let's see. Two places that I've worked are using it. The most recent addition is DreamHost. The website for Fennec was actually created so that I could give a presentation on it to my coworkers at DreamHost, and we've decided to use it for all testing going forward. Pretty good reception, I think.
Oh, that's nice. And I guess the other place is the previous workplace.
It's a previous place I've worked, and I'm not sure that they'd want me to share details about it. But let's just say it's one of the really big companies that people would recognize the name of anywhere in the world.
Yeah, I guess they can look up your CV and then find one of the names and then think about it. Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever. So how many people are there using it, or how deep is that in the company?
Well, it's all new testing moving forward, when possible, should use Fennec. That was the decision we came to at the end of that meeting.
Oh, that's nice. So who do you recommend, or how would you? I saw that you gave presentations about Fennec as well on the portal Thermongers, right?
Yes.
In the group. So you're doing some kind of introduction or promotion of this, but
Yeah.
who would you think that could use, or should module authors use, CPAN authors?
I would recommend it to CPAN authors for sure. I'd recommend they use vanilla Fennec. There's two flavors of Fennec. There's the vanilla one, which is just pure Perl. There's nothing magic or special. But the one that's really nice is Fennec Declare, which uses Devil Declare to create some really nice syntax. And I'd recommend the Fennec Declare to any company on a product that they're, an end product. But for CPAN module authors, I'd recommend just vanilla Fennec, because not everyone wants to install Devil Declare just so that they could test a module they're installing. There's a lot of people who would look at Devil Declare and think, ooh, I don't like that magic. So the good thing is you don't need that magic. Vanilla Fennec doesn't have any special thing.
Okay, is Fennec itself is obviously open source? It's a module on CPAN. Who is developing Fennec? Is it only you? Are there more people involved?
I'm primarily the developer for it. There have been some contributions from people at the Portland Perl Mongers. One key feature of Fennec was actually suggested by Michael Schwern, who's also looked over the documentation on a couple occasions. And I've got a couple other friends who've contributed here and there. Also, DreamHost has contributed some code back to it.
Okay. Do you need? Are there more plans for Fennec where you would need help from more people to get involved?
I currently consider it feature complete, but that would immediately change if someone requested a really nice feature.
Okay.
So patches are welcome, suggestions are welcome, and the whole design of Fennec is very pluggable in nature. So if people wanted to extend it or add on to it, it shouldn't be too difficult. Like an example, we were talking about the collector that uses temporary files for all the test output. That's a generic class, and I actually also created a version of the collector that uses an SQLite database. I found that was incredibly slow, and I actually didn't keep it or include it. But there could be some value to using a database to store the results as they're coming out instead of just dumping them into temp files. That's just one example. There's plenty of others.
Okay. So if someone wants to try, we can kind of she can go and then look at the website, go on to CPAN module, look at there. Where can people get help? Where can they reach you, or is there a?
I will always respond to emails and bug requests on GitHub. I'm also always hanging out on the Perl IRC network, irc.perl.org. I hang out in the Fennec channel as well as several other channels. I go by the handle Exodist, that's EXODIST, and I'm always ready to help.
By the way, if you've already mentioned that's your handle, what was there for your nickname? Exodus, right?
Exodus. It's a variation on the word Exodus, which is my favorite book of the Bible.
Oh, okay.
Largely because of the Charlton Heston movie, The Ten Commandments.
Interesting. Good. Anything else you would like to say to the audience of the show?
Well, just to talk a bit more about the features of Fennec. One of the things that Fennec hopes to solve is a problem where most developers who are really skilled developers know lots of paradigms and lots of correct ways to do things will go to their tests and suddenly lose, like deer in the headlights, lose their ability to write good tests, because the way testing is largely set up with test more is you've got a script. You use test more, you write all your tests, and then you write done testing. And tests are Perl, just like your modules are. You can create objects. You can create complicated structures. You don't have to have a linear script that's just plug this in, get this result. And Fennec, one of the ideas is that when you're using Fennec, you can go, oh, hey, I'm a programmer. I know how to do this the right way. I don't have to just do everything as one giant function. I mean, a test file 1,000 lines long is essentially no different than a 1,000-line function in a module somewhere. And when test files get really big, the benefit Fennec gives you is the ability to break them up into smaller pieces without needing to divide the files. And another benefit of this, just listing off features here, is Fennec, you can run a specific test block. So let's say you have a test takes a full 10 minutes to run because it's got so much stuff in it. And say you've divided it into 20 different blocks. With Fennec, you can say, just run this block. That way you don't have to wait for the whole 10-minute thing to run. A good reason for this is if you break one test at the very end of the test file, you can say, hey, just run this.
Actually, that's a very nice feature, because I was thinking about I was about to ask you about this done testing thing. I'm not I don't really like the whole idea of done testing. I really prefer having the plan there and counting my tests, and for that reason I really like the subtests thing, because then I can test more, because then I can really count only to 10, and that's more or less the biggest number I can count to. But then the main reason I'm against the done testing thing is because I keep commenting out of my tests when I'm debugging some failure that's at the end of the test, or even at the beginning. Sometimes I just, the third test fails and I just write an exit after it. So when I run the test again and again, I won't have to run the whole thing.
Right.
Now,
And
if I can run just the first part really easily, then I don't need to comment out my test anymore. So then the done testing is not that, I don't see that dangerous.
no, and you actually need to use the done testing with Fennec because it kicks off some extra logic that runs. But yes, that is one of the benefits of Fennec is you can give it a test block by name, or you can give it a line number and say only run the test block that spans across this line number, which also makes editor integration very easy. For instance, I've bound a key in Vim. Whenever I press the key, it'll run whichever test block is under my cursor.
Oh, that's nice.
It's really nice. And that way, when you've got a long test file, just run the part you care about.
Is there some integration with the actual code, so you can, while editing your main code, the module that you're working, you can say, okay, now the test that's testing this feature?
And no, there isn't anything like that.
That would be cool.
That would be nice, but I'm
Hey,
not quite
here's
sure
a
how
feature,
you go about that magic.
Here's a feature request.
Yeah. One more
Okay.
thing to mention, people in the Ruby community might be familiar with the RSpec testing workflow, and Fennec implements that completely. What RSpec does is it gives you a way to describe a state and then have various tests run under that state. And you can nest states, so you can have substates and even deeper states. It's really a way of doing setup and teardown around various groups of tests.
I just thought about that, the whole idea of how to show actually the value of Fennec is that taking maybe an existing module that's out there on cpan and replacing the test with tests that are written in Fennec. I mean, some of the features you don't immediately see because the thing that you can actually run the test, part of the test, you can't show it this way, but you might be able to show how the test code got a lot cleaner.
Yes, and it's actually very easy to do that. Fennec uses Test Builder under the hood, and it will automatically load several of the main test modules for you. When you load Fennec, it's the same as loading test more, test warn, test exception, and a couple other useful testing utilities. Simply using Fennec will load them all for you. So to convert a test from just test more to Fennec, all you have to do is replace the use test more with use Fennec, and then make sure it uses done testing at the end.
Yeah,
And
but
suddenly it's using Fennec.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, but that wouldn't show the power of Fennec. That would just
No, it
replace
wouldn't. But
Yeah.
it makes it very easy to convert a test. It means you don't have to start from scratch if you wanted to use Fennec features in one part or another of an existing test file.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
There's one more feature of Fennec I'd like to promote, and that's that it loads mock quick. And right now there are a lot of mocking libraries on cpan, but most of them make you want to gouge your eyes out because the APIs are terrible. I'm not going to call out any specifically because I don't want to insult anyone. But mock quick.
You managed to insult all of them at once, so that's okay.
Yes, there we go. But mock quick is a declarative mocking library that has all the features of mocking classes, mocking objects without classes, really any kind of mocking you want to do. And it's very easy to scope it lexically because it returns a control object. And when that control object goes out of scope, your mocking goes away. So it's very easy to limit your mocking to just the places you want the mocking to exist. And the API, I mean, I'm biased since I wrote it, but I think the API is very nice, and it's one of the things that I get the most feedback on is mock quick.
Well, that's good that if you're satisfied with your own code. I mean, many people feel that okay, I wrote this, but at least it's 2 weeks ago, and it's horrible, and then they should rewrite the
I've
whole
been
thing.
there. I've been there. Mock Quick and Fennec are probably the only projects where most of the code I'm actually willing to say, hey, this is pretty good code.
Okay, that was really interesting and quite long, as I can see. But talking about testing, I always like talking about testing. I like that subject, and it was really nice having you on the show. Under the show notes, I'm going to put a couple of links how to reach you and how to reach the project. Okay,
Okay.
so thank you very much for coming to the and talking to the audience.
No problem. Thanks
Bye.
for having me.
Okay. So this was the Perl Maven show. You saw the Perl Maven show. My name is Gabor Sabo. You can follow the Perl Maven site on the RSS feed, or you can subscribe to the mailing list. And I hope to see you soon in the next episode. Bye.